Now, as the name of the video implies, this is the 12th and final part of a story, so unless you want to be very lost and confused, I'd recommend starting at part 1, and if you like it, working your way back here. I'll include a link to all previous parts in the description below. And now, without any further ado, let's finish this story. We find ourselves on Jakku, on top of the Millennium Falcon, where Anakin is sitting and meditating, while Rex, with a pair of electro binoculars, keeps his sights on the horizon for anyone or anything that may be approaching. After a short time, however, he sighs and sits himself down next to Anakin, making a few old age moans and groans as he does, before he says, "One of the reasons I always loved serving under you is how little of this we did." Anakin opens one eye and focuses it on Rex. "So little of what?" he asks. Rex gives him a half grin and says, "Sitting around and waiting. It was never your style to let the enemy come to you, General." Anakin shuts both eyes again and says, "My style got a lot of my men needlessly killed during the Clone Wars." But Rex shakes his head. "It's war itself that gets a lot of men needlessly killed, sir. Besides, it was an honor getting to serve under you. All my brothers and I agreed on that." Rex then scratches at his head for a moment and hesitantly begins, "Speaking of my brothers in the 501st, what happened to them?" Anakin doesn't answer, so then Rex says, "I still can't believe my brothers and I were designed and programmed from the start to betray our generals, to turn on the Jedi, and that we weren't strong enough mentally to resist Order 66. Anakin still doesn't open his eyes and says, "At least you had chips in your head that made you betray the Jedi. I did it of my own free will." Rex is about to respond to that when they both hear a loud boom that shakes the ground and the falcon they sit upon. Anakin finally opens his eyes, and off in the distance, the two can see a cloud of dust rising from the ravine, the one Leia and Kanan went down not long ago. Rex immediately starts to get up, but Anakin reaches out a hand and stops him, shaking his head. "We must trust in Leia and Kanan," he says, though there is clearly concern on his face. Rex snorts and says, "If this were back in the day, and it was Senator Amidala in that ravine, you'd already be halfway there, and me and the rest of my brothers would be scrambling right out to catch up." That comment causes Anakin to flinch ever so slightly, and Rex then says, "Sorry to bring that up, General. It's just, my brothers and I always suspected there was more going on between the two of you than the other Jedi ever guessed at." To that, Anakin can't help but give a slight grin, but then he suddenly springs to his feet, which causes Rex to slowly get up and say, "I knew you'd change your mind. Here we go, just like the old days." But Anakin shakes his head and says, "No, Rex. Kanan and Leia will have to handle Luke and Mara Jade on their own. I sense something else drawing near. She knows that I'm here, that I'm waiting for her, and I can feel her hatred for me." Rex gives a wry smile. "What do you ever do to this Sith possessing Ahsoka to make her so angry?" Anakin shrugs. "I'm not sure, but her hatred for me will make her powerful." Rex nods in understanding and then asks, "So, do we keep waiting, or do we do it the Skywalker way and charge in and figure out a plan as we go?" Despite it all, Anakin can't help but frown at Rex and say, "The Skywalker way?" Rex only shrugs and says, "That's just what we used to call it, General." Anakin gives a slight chuckle and says, "Well, this time, Captain, we won't be doing anything. This is something I have to do alone." Rex looks angry and a little hurt as he says, "I didn't come all this way not to help, General, or to babysit a smuggler and his Wookiee." Anakin then lays a hand on Rex's shoulder and says, "Call me Anakin, remember? And you have helped me, just by accepting me again after everything. But this is something I must do alone." Rex looks like he wants to protest more, but finally nods as Anakin turns, jogs away, jumps off the ship, and heads off into the desert. And as Rex watches him go, he says softly to himself, "Bring her home, General." We're now back in the ravine, and see a mound of boulders, and on the fringe of that mound is an unconscious Leia, covered in dust and dirt. Though she looks to be relatively unhurt, there is still a few of the smaller rocks and boulders on top of her, pinning her legs down. And standing not far from this, with a calm look upon his face, is the shimmering blue visage of Master Yoda. That's when we see Leia's eyes slowly flutter open, and the first thing she sees is Master Yoda, and it immediately brings a look of peace to her face, before that peace is shattered by the realization of where she is and what has happened, and she calls out for Kanan. But Yoda then lowers his head slightly and gives a small sigh. "Gone he is. One with the Force he has become. Help him on his final journey. I have." Leia shuts her eyes, but the tears still manage to escape and leave trails upon her dust-covered face. When she again opens them, she looks beyond Master Yoda and sees, striding quickly towards her, are Mara Jade and Luke, and Mara already has an ignited red saber in hand. Leia then panics for a moment and tries to get up, only to find her legs are stuck. Her gaze falls upon Master Yoda, and she says one single word to him, "Please." But Master Yoda only says, "Help you? I cannot. Remember your training, you must." But Leia shakes her head, looking ever more frantic as Luke and Mara Jade draw ever closer. "My training," she says. "All you ever trained me to do was purge the dark side, and then there were the countless hours of meditation and—" But Leia cuts herself off, and suddenly her mind drifts to the past, and we're taken to Dagobah, and see Leia calmly sitting and meditating, and all around her are a circle of stones of various shapes and sizes, and walking on the outside of that circle is Master Yoda, and every so often he stops and points at one of them with his cane, and Leia immediately uses the Force to lift it. Leia then snaps back to the present and sees Yoda's Force ghost pointing with his shimmering blue cane at one of the stones that pins her down, and immediately Leia uses the Force to lift it and fling it away. Yoda then points at another, and Leia again lifts it and flings it away, and then another, until she is free. Yoda then fades away as Leia, wincing in great pain from her injuries, gets to her feet just as Mara Jade and Luke reach her. Mara, with an angry scowl on her face, then says, "Of course you would survive that." But then she smirks and adds, "But I don't seem to see your friend anywhere." Leia, however, doesn't let that get to her. Instead, as she stands there on unsteady feet, battered and bruised, she pulls out a lightsaber, Mara Jade's purple lightsaber, and ignites it and takes a stance just like Kanan showed her, and her face is grim yet resolute. "The Force is with me," is all she says. "That lightsaber," Mara Jade says through clenched teeth, "was a gift to me from my master, and you would dare use it against me?" Leia says nothing to that, but only stands there calmly, which seems to anger Mara Jade even more. And then Mara raises her hand and quickly unleashes another Force blast at Leia. But Leia just as quickly stretches out one of her hands, palm out, and seems to absorb it, before resuming her stance and looking as calm as ever. It's then Luke, who stands a good distance behind Mara Jade, that says, "Let's just leave her and get off this rock. My ship isn't far from here, and together you and I can overpower that Sith apprentice I told you about, and—" But Mara cuts him off and again balls her mechanical hand into a fist. No, she must pay for what she's done to me. Without another word, she then charges at Leia and begins to attack. But Leia, who now seems unfazed by any of her injuries she may have suffered, moves swiftly and eloquently, and with a rather effortless grace, quickly turns the tables on Mara Jade, who gets more and more frustrated. And soon, Leia is driving Mara back, and it seems like only a matter of time before she will land a blow that will either incapacitate her or even end her life. But that's when we hear another saber ignite, which causes the duel between Mara and Leia to cease instantly as they both turn and look at Luke, who only stares at the red saber in his hand and says, "Leave her alone." Mara and Leia then exchange quick looks, as if both are asking the other, "Is he talking to me or you?" before Luke gives his answer by attacking Leia, which causes a large, wicked grin to form on the face of Mara Jade. And for some time, as she catches her breath, Mara watches as Luke begins to drive Leia back. Mara finally then reaches out her hand and uses the Force to catch Leia in a Force choke, which takes Leia completely by surprise, and she drops her sabers as both hands go to her throat. With anger in his eyes, Luke then draws his saber back like he's going to finish her off, but he hesitates. Leia then manages to say, "The offer from before, from the first time we met, still stands, Luke. I can help you rid yourself of the dark side." Saying that only seems to make Luke angrier, and he asks, "Why? Why do you care so much about me? And what makes you think I want to rid myself of the dark side?" Leia almost manages to give him a smile and says, "Because I feel the good in you. I feel the conflict." Luke shakes his head, and his look becomes resolute as he says, again pulling back his saber as if to strike, "There is no conflict." Luke begins to swing, but stops himself. His expression softens, and it seems as if he's about to say something, just as we hear a blaster go off and see a red blaster bolt strike Luke in the shoulder, which causes him to cry out in pain as he falls backwards. We then see, standing nearby, Han Solo with a cocky grin upon his face and his blaster pointed in Luke's direction, and with him are Chewie and Rex, and Mara Jade is forced to release Leia as Chewie, roaring angrily, charges at her, firing his bowcaster as he does, though Mara is able to block all the shots with her saber. Luke then gets to his feet, one hand over the blaster wound to his shoulder, the other holding his saber, though he holds it limply at his side because of the injured arm. Luke and Leia then lock eyes for a moment, and Leia says, "The offer still stands, Luke, and it always will." Luke gives her a slight nod and begins to run off, and Mara Jade sees this and seems about to yell something to Luke to tell him to stop and fight, but as Chewie gets ever closer, she seems to change her mind, and she also runs the other way with Luke. That's when Leia cries out to Chewie, telling him to stop and to let them go. Rather reluctantly, Chewie then stops his mad dash and also watches as they run off. That's when Han, holding up his blaster with a smile on his face, says to Leia as he approaches her, "Fancy laser swords are no match for a good blaster." He then holsters it and looks at Leia, who only stares as Luke and Mara run off. "Yeah, don't waste your breath to thank me or anything, sweetheart. It's not like I just saved your life." Leia, still watching Luke, only says, "You didn't. He wasn't going to kill me. I can feel it." Han rolls his eyes but lets it drop. He then glances around and says, "Hey, where's Kanan?" But as soon as he says it, he seems to realize what's happened, and his eyes focus on the mound of boulders. Rex, however, has already figured it out, and he's already started to move some of the smaller rocks that cover Kanan's body. Chewie then comes over and begins to move some of the larger ones, as does Leia using the Force. Even Han comes over and begins to move some rocks, and as the four of them work to retrieve Kanan's body, Leia looks at Chewie and Rex in turn and says, "Thank you. Thank you for coming after me." Both Rex and Chewie then look at Han, and Leia too looks at Han, who almost seems hurt. She then says to him, "Was it?" And Han finishes, "My idea to come after you and Kanan after we heard the big boom? Yeah, it was. Don't read too much into it, Princess. I was just tired of sitting around the Falcon." Han then immediately goes back to moving the rocks, and the scene ends. We're now inside the Imperial compound, with Grand Admiral Thrawn, who sits behind a desk, his 2 royal guards standing behind him, and upon that desk is a small blue hologram of Grand Moff Tarkin that is saying, "I have always admired your wisdom, Thrawn, and now of all times, wisdom is needed. Do not force my hand and make me destroy you." Thrawn then simply replies, "You shall have my answer soon, Grand Moff Tarkin." The image of Tarkin gives a nod and fades away. Thrawn then hits a button on his desk, which causes the door to his office to slide open, and 2 more royal guards enter, followed by the vessel, who has his staff, and Yub Tashu, who immediately says, "We mustn't delay any longer. Tarkin will fire upon this base, make no mistake." Thrawn gives a slight nod. "I have little doubt of that, but I also have little interest in talking to you, advisor." Yub Tashu looks confused. "But I was told you wanted to speak with me." Thrawn shakes his head. "I said I wished to speak with the vessel." Yub Tashu gives him a look. "You mean speak to the vessel, and anything you wish to say to him should be said in front of me. He is my responsibility, after all, given to me by our great Lord Sidious." Thrawn, as usual, looks calm as he says, "No, I will speak with the vessel, and your presence is not required for that." Thrawn gives the subtlest movements with his head and glances back at his royal guards, who instantly spring into action and escort a protesting Yub Tashu from the room. Once gone, Thrawn gets to his feet and moves towards the vessel, who only stands there with his head and eyes lowered. "Tell me," Thrawn begins, "what is your name?" The vessel makes no movements, and there's nothing but silence for a long moment, before finally the vessel speaks and says, "I have no name." Thrawn gives the slightest of grins. "So you do speak after all. Now speak again and tell me your name." Again there's a long moment of silence, before Thrawn says, stopping directly in front of the vessel and staring at his downcast face, "What is your name?" Finally, the vessel says in a voice that is eerily similar to Palpatine's, "I am called Everett." Thrawn then replies, "And who calls you this? I'm assuming the same one who has been teaching you a great many other things?" When Thrawn says this, one of Everett's royal guards flinches ever so slightly, but Thrawn seems to not notice, though something tells us he did. "I am my own teacher," Everett says to that, and Thrawn then replies, "I could certainly believe that. You are, after all, a perfected clone of perhaps the most brilliant being I have ever come across. But that then begs the question, just how much alike are you to him?" This question seems to confuse Everett, so Thrawn elaborates, "Perhaps I should ask if you are just a vessel or your own being." Everett shakes his head. "It does not matter." Thrawn then simply says, "I think it does, and how you answer this question will determine my course of action, and perhaps the fate of the galaxy." Finally, Everett looks up and meets Thrawn's gaze and says, "I'm not like him, and I don't want to be like him." Thrawn gives one nod of the head, and then his gaze falls upon the staff. and yet you keep and cherish his gift to you. Everett's face darkens, and he says, "It was always my intent to kill him when he came for me." Thrawn gives another nod of his head and asks, "And yet, even with him gone, you still keep it." Everett then coldly replies, "And now I keep it to kill anyone who seeks to take me to this dark side power, where Palpatine may or may not dwell." Thrawn, once more, gives a nod of the head and says, "You may now go, Everett." Everett seems confused and asks, "Go where?" Thrawn gives a slight shrug and says, his gaze turning upon the royal guard who flinched earlier, "Wherever you choose, with whoever you choose." Everett gives a slight smile and thanks Thrawn before quickly leaving the room. We're now with Anakin in the middle of the desert and see as he starts to climb a massive sand dune, and there's a look of grim determination upon his face. As he reaches the crest of the dune, he looks out across the way, and standing upon the next dune over is a figure dressed in dark robes that ripple in the stiff desert breeze. After a deep breath, Anakin then begins the descent, and as he does, the figure across the way also begins the descent, until the two stand facing each other, a few arm lengths apart, at the base of the two massive sand dunes. Neither says a word or makes a move for a long while, until the dark robed figure pulls back their hood, revealing the face of Ahsoka, with eyes that seem to be alive with fire as they blaze yellow and orange with hatred. She then says, sounding much like Ahsoka, but with a dark echo within her voice, "The Jedi of old prophesied about the coming of a chosen one who would bring a lasting balance to the Force, but they were fools and dreamers, for there is but one who can bring a lasting balance to the Force, and that is my master. But you, Anakin Skywalker, will not live long enough to see his glorious return, for you will meet your destiny this day." Anakin then says, opening his arms as if in a friendly gesture, "I did not come here to fight you, but rather to make a deal." Ahsoka's eyes narrow on him, both in confusion and suspicion, and Anakin continues, "My former master, Darth Sidious, he felt a presence out in the unknown regions of the galaxy, one he thought to be the source of the dark side itself. He only spoke to me of it once, wanting to know if I too heard that call, but I didn't." Anakin places his hands behind his back and begins to pace as he continues. Sidious believed that if he could reach it, he would be gifted with unimaginable power, and that lust for power blinded him to the obvious. Anakin pauses, and Ahsoka then gives a grin and asks, "Which is, oh, please do tell." Anakin then says, "The dark side does not give power, it must always be taken. So whatever was out there was not interested in giving him power, but taking it from Sidious, or, more likely, using him in some other fashion, perhaps even wanting to possess his body, much like you have possessed a body that does not belong to you. Though I dare say whoever is out there would have been greatly disappointed with the state of Sidious's body, though it may explain why my old master was obsessed with creating new life and a new body for himself. Likely he thought once he got out there, his new power would grant him the ability to inhabit that new body, but in reality, that power would have simply destroyed Sidious and taken that new body as its own." Ahsoka gives a brief round of mock applause before saying, "You mentioned something about a deal?" Anakin stops his pacing and then says, "I offer this body to you, to give to your master, if you let Ahsoka go." Anakin again spreads his arms open in a friendly manner. "Take it, now, with your consciousness, and release her and enter me. I will not fight it." Ahsoka seems to be considering it, when suddenly she gives a knowing grin and says, "You know, the Jedi of old were much different from the Jedi of this age, and the biggest difference between the two is that the Jedi of old were not afraid of the dark side. In fact, some even wielded it because they had a technique for purging it when it threatened to consume them." It is now Ahsoka's turn to start to pace as she continues. "I remember you from Malachor. I remember when you were Darth Vader, and you tried to destroy the one you have come here to save. And though I have known many Sith in my lifetime, felt great hatred, and have seen the full power of the darkness, I have only ever seen one as powerful as you were that day as you tried to destroy your former apprentice. And that is my master." Ahsoka stops her pacing and then says, "And yet here you stand, no longer Darth Vader and a Jedi once more, and I cannot sense even a trace of that darkness within you anymore. That can mean only one thing, that you have somehow learned the ancient technique of purging the dark side, and if I tried to possess you, you would have the means by which to not only fight it, but to destroy me." Anakin gives her a rather cocky grin and says, "Well, you can't blame me for trying, right?" Ahsoka's face darkens as she then pulls out her sabers from her robes. She first ignites her white saber, and then her black one, before doing a flourish with them and taking a pose much like the real Ahsoka would have. Anakin then ignites his blue saber and takes a few steps back as he says, "I will not fight you, but I will help Ahsoka fight you." Anakin then shuts his eyes and raises his hand, palm out and towards Ahsoka, who flinches and deactivates her sabers and puts her hands to her head and groans in agony. After a few moments of this, Anakin stops and his face is horrified. He then says, mostly to himself, "No, I can't sense her in there. What have you done?" Ahsoka quickly recovers, reignites her sabers and grins. "You're too late. The last remnants of Ahsoka Tano have been destroyed." And without another word, she attacks Anakin. We're now back at the Imperial compound, and on the roof of it, we can see Grand Admiral Thrawn walking up the ramp of his Imperial shuttle, and as he does, we can hear alarms blaring and a repeating announcement to evacuate the base. Before Thrawn actually gets inside, we see Yub Tashu run, well, the best he can at least, towards the shuttle before being detained by royal guards who stand at the base of the ramp. He shouts up at Thrawn, "Where are you going? Where is the vessel? This is not our Emperor's plan. He chose you to do this. He trusted you." Thrawn gives a nod of his head to his royal guards, who shove Yub Tashu down to the ground and then begin to ascend the ramp themselves, just as it begins to rise. Thrawn then says, "I have served at the Emperor's leisure in the hopes that he could truly bring peace and stability to this part of the galaxy, but he is gone and his way has failed. So I shall now look for a better alternative." We're then inside the base, where the alarms are even louder, and we see Everett and his two royal guards running through a corridor when suddenly the first lasers hit and the entire base is rocked. All three of them then stop, and with the sounds of explosions all around them, the two royal guards look at each other and simply nod to one another, before one of them takes off and keeps running down the corridor. The one left with Everett then removes their helmet, and we see a beautiful woman with short brown hair, and she smiles at Everett, who smiles back. "At least we die together," she says to him, but Everett shakes his head. "No, I have not endured all I have in this life of mine just to let it end here and now. We'll make it out of here somehow." She replies, "And go where?" Everett says back, "I don't care. I don't care if we just stay here on Jakku and make a life for ourselves." She smiles back at him happily as she nods, and the two now run off together down the corridor. We're now back with Ahsoka and Anakin, and watch as Ahsoka moves with blinding speed and furiously swings and hacks away at Anakin, who easily and almost lazily blocks all of her attacks, though makes none of his own. Finally, Ahsoka halts, and with hatred burning in her eyes, she says, How are you so strong with the Force? You are nothing more than a false chosen one." Anakin gives a slight shake of the head and almost smiles as he says, "I don't need to be strong with the Force. I just need to be strong with my Padawan, because she's still in there, helping guide me to see and block every attack you make. I'm doing now what I could never bring myself to do fully before. I'm putting all of my belief and faith in her." Ahsoka then lets out a rage-filled scream as she renews her attacks, and this time she begins to drive Anakin back, and now he doesn't block every swing so easily and begins to look hesitant and unsure and like he's struggling. Finally, Ahsoka makes a powerful swing and knocks the saber from Anakin's hand and sends it flying a good ways in the distance. And as Anakin reaches out with his right hand with the Force to pull it back to him, Ahsoka swings her black saber and chops Anakin's mechanical hand off, and he then stumbles backwards, clutching at the stump, which gives off small electrical sparks. Ahsoka then stands over him and declares, "Your Padawan is completely gone, and I do mean completely, for she is not one with the Force, but rather everything she once was has been destroyed by me." We then hear, off in the distance, explosions, and both Anakin and Ahsoka turn their heads and see that in the direction of the Imperial compound, it is raining green laser fire, as Grand Moff Tarkin's fleet of Star Destroyers fires upon the base. Ahsoka takes a few weary steps in that direction, and her face is full of disbelief and horror as she says, "No! The map! Those fools will destroy it!" That's when Anakin raises the hand he has left, and with palm out, aims it in Ahsoka's direction, and this time, there is a flash of light, and we are suddenly somewhere else entirely, somewhere where there is complete and utter darkness, and standing lost and alone in that darkness is the real Ahsoka Tano. But she is not alone anymore, for Anakin now stands behind her, and he calls out her name repeatedly as he runs to her. When he reaches her, he takes hold of her and turns her around, but as Ahsoka looks at him, there is no recognition in her eyes, and she even says, Who are you?" Tears well up in Anakin's eyes as he says, giving her a little shake, It's me, Ahsoka. It's Anakin. I came for you. And together we can destroy the one who's controlling you. Together we can free you and be a team again. We can be Jedi together again. And we can put right all the wrongs I have done in my life as Vader. And I can't do that without you, Ahsoka. I can't. So you have to come back to me, you hear? You have to fight and come back to me. I need you. But Ahsoka only looks confused, as if she has no idea who he is or what he's even talking about. And after a few moments of difficult thought, she finally says, "But I'm not a Jedi, am I? Something happened. I never became one. I don't remember anything else but that." And with that, Ahsoka pulls herself free from Anakin's hold and simply starts to walk away, looking completely out of it. Anakin's about to follow her when he hears a voice he has not heard since he was a child. "Anakin, it is I, Qui-Gon Jinn." Anakin shakes his head and says, "This is a trick. It can't be you. You died a long time ago on Naboo." The voice of Qui-Gon then replies, "Only my body died, but my consciousness endured when I became one with the Force." Anakin looks skeptical and states, "That's not possible." "It is," Qui-Gon begins, "and, in time, those secrets may be taught to you as well. But now is not the time for that, but rather, it is the time for the hardest test any Jedi must face. You must let your Padawan go." "No," Anakin snaps back. "I can save her. I know I can." Qui-Gon replies, "Just like you could save your mother or Padme?" "No, Anakin. You must take your own advice given to your daughter and let the one you care about go, and then do what you know is right." Anakin shakes his head. "No, I won't kill Ahsoka. I came here to save her, and I will." Qui-Gon replies, "If you wait much longer, there will be nothing left to save. But if you destroy this Sith now, there may still be time to save Ahsoka's essence, and allow her to be one with the Force forever. And you have my word, Anakin. I will guide her on this last great journey." We then see Ahsoka turn around, and her face lights up for a moment as she says, I remember." The smile grows. "I remember everything." The smile then starts to fade and is replaced by a look of horror as she looks Anakin dead in the eyes. "I remember everything." Anakin moves towards her, but Ahsoka backs away. "Snips," Anakin begins. It's me. It's really me. I came here to save you." Ahsoka looks hesitant, but then says, "Master? Master, is it really you?" It's now Anakin's face that lights up, and a smile forms on it. "It's me, Ahsoka, and I'm going to save you." We then hear a dark, sinister laugh echo all around them in the darkness, and Ahsoka quickly says, "Then kill her for me, please. It's the only way." Anakin shakes his head. "No, I will not do that. I can save you." Ahsoka gives him a small, sad smile and says, "That is the only way to save me. What's left of me, that is. I'm already gone, Anakin. I have been. I died on Malachor. She's only possessing my body and preventing me from becoming one with the Force." "No," Anakin says, shaking his head. "No, if you died on Malachor, that means I killed you." Ahsoka shakes her head. "No, Anakin, you didn't. Vader did. And you are not him. You never were." Ahsoka takes a few steps forward and takes Anakin's hand and simply says, "Please, Anakin, let me go. Let me be one with the Force." With tears in his eyes, Anakin slowly begins to nod his head, and there is another flash of light, and we're back in the desert of Jakku, and Ahsoka, with a look of bewilderment upon her face that quickly turns to anger, says, "The last of Ahsoka Tano has been swept away." Anakin doesn't say anything to that, but instead reaches out with the Force and pulls his lightsaber to him, and as soon as he has it, he shuts his eyes and says, "Forgive me, Snips," before he activates it, springs to his feet, and begins his attack. And now it is Ahsoka who is easily being driven back by Anakin, who wields his saber in his left hand, and Ahsoka grows more and more panicked and confused until finally Anakin drives his saber forward and right through her chest. This is when Anakin's eyes go wide, as if he can't believe what he's just done, and he deactivates his saber and quickly flings it away just in time to catch Ahsoka, who has dropped her sabers and started to fall backwards. He then gently lays her down in the sand as she begins to cough, and suddenly she looks upon Anakin and says in a weak voice, without the echo in it, "Anakin, you did it. You destroyed her." Anakin shakes his head and immediately says, "I'm sorry, Ahsoka. I'm so sorry for Malachor, and I'm sorry because I came here to save you, not this. And I failed you, just like I fail everyone I care about." But Ahsoka weakly raises her hand and silences him as she smiles. You have saved me, Anakin, and now I will get to join with the Force. Anakin shakes his head. But I still need you, Stips. I need you now more than ever. I was going to ask you to help me rebuild the Jedi Order, to usher in a new age. Ahsoka, who is clearly fading, manages to smile weakly one more time. But I will be with you through the Force. And besides, I never became a Jedi, remember? A single tear then rolls down Anakin's cheek as an idea comes to him. He once more Force pulls his saber to him, and he gets to his feet and ignites it. He places the blue blade above each of Ahsoka's shoulders in turn and says, By the right of the Council, by the will of the Force, you may rise, Ahsoka Tano, a Jedi Knight. Ahsoka, with that small smile still upon her face, takes one last breath and then whispers, Thank you, Master. We then fade to darkness, and a few moments later we see a temple, one that seems to be newly constructed, and standing upon the wide steps leading up to its entrance are Anakin and Leia. Anakin smiles down at Leia and says, I think it's time to keep that promise about getting you a saber of your own. But Leia shakes her head and holds up Kanan's saber and says, That's okay, Father. I think this one will do just fine. Anakin smiles and nods, and as we pull back, we see two large statues flanking the steps, one of Ahsoka and one of Kanan. We then get a shot of a Star Destroyer, and a moment later, we're on the bridge and see Grand Admiral Thrawn as an officer comes up to him and says, The Senate has just voted, sir, and will be restoring itself to a democratic state. Thrawn nods as if that doesn't surprise him, and then the officer asks, What are your orders, sir? Do we return to Coruscant? That's when every officer on the bridge turns and looks at Thrawn, who simply says, No. Set course for the unknown regions. We then see Maul's old Mandalorian ship flying through space, and then we're in the cockpit with Mara Jade and Luke. We see through the viewport the ship jump to hyperspace, and Mara gets to her feet, gives Luke a kiss atop the head, and heads to the back of the ship. That's when Luke pulls out the Sith holocron, and we watch as it floats above the palm of his hand and starts to open. Finally, we get a wide shot of the sands of Jakku at dusk, and in the foreground we see a small hut. And then we're in that hut with Everett and the royal guard he escaped with, though she is now dressed in simple desert garb, as is he. Everett then lays a hand upon her stomach and smiles and says, My life has been shrouded in darkness, but this child shall be a ray of light and hope into it. The two then walk outside the hut, and in each other's arms, watch as the sun dips below the horizon. And that is how this story ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think of the last part of our story. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thank you so much for watching.